Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I would very much like to continue on our journey, our discussion, if you will, of the works directed by the Japanese filmmaker whose name is Takeshi Kitano. Today, I'd like to focus our attention, if I may, on that film which he directed and wrote and edited and starred as Beat Takeshi. It was released in 1993, and it is even now one of his most popular works. It's striking, it's loud, it's flashy, it's also meditative, it's very pensive, and it takes its time in a beautifully poetic way, as well as being a full-throated, bold gangster film that is part of the genre and also in excellent ways quite antithetical to many of the genre roots in that wonderful je ne sais quoi type of Beat Takeshi Kitano atmosphere. The film that I'm referring to is this. This is, in Japanese, Sonatine, and it is referred to in English as Sonatine. So, this film, Sonatine, is at its heart and essence a gangster film, a Japanese gangster film with Beat Takeshi in the starring role as a gangster himself. One might call his character maybe a mid-level gangster, so he has a certain degree of authority. And so he has other associates and people that work for him and under him. And through certain developments of plot, narrative, and gangster intrigue, we see that his group or faction becomes involved with rival turf wars that also bring him and his particular faction or group or gang to Okinawa. And from there, further gangster war antics ensue, leading to the need to go into a state of hiding and passing the time and having to spend the time either by occupying oneself due to boredom or using the time to have inner meditations and pensive thoughts about oneself and what it is one is doing, and many other things of that nature, while at the same time holding on quite strongly and quite vividly to a sense of the gangster genre, especially the gangster Japanese gangster film genre that this film is undoubtedly a part of, and also having a strong grip on the nature of Kitano and his filmmaking and his way and style of presenting information, as well as presenting bits of humor and violence and character. And throughout the way, we see incredible setups, very creative, and also very much part of Beat Takeshi and that entertainer comedian aesthetic, which I think give this film a very bold stance indeed. So this is in essence what we get when we have the film Sonatine playing, or when we are watching it and experiencing it. There are many things to say, I think, about this film, and I think one of the areas is the fact that it is another Japanese gangster film. So if we recall, we have seen from Kitano's works in the past up to now, a film like Violent Cop, where he played a policeman in that film. And there were hints of a gangster connection here and there, but his focus of that film was, again, on the police side. Then in the second directed film, known in English as Boiling Point, he also played a gangster, and there were elements in that film involving local, low-level gangsters and the like. And then now we have Sonatine, And we have this film where he appears. Again, he made another film, of course, which was known in English, A Scene at the Sea, which had, I think, a very interesting and quite poignant focus to it. But now we have Sonatine, where we return to the direct examination of the Japanese gangster film, the Yakuza film, with Beat Takeshi in front and center as the main character of the piece. So with that, we get the now very well established blend of cinematic violence, action, and stillness, and meditative mood and thought, and the comedic style and goings-on of Beat Takeshi, the performer. And we get so much more in that package along the way. So, for example, we have moments of very interesting staging of characters in certain situations when then all of a sudden bursts of violence occur. And they occur quite abruptly, and they occur seemingly with or without reason. But everything in the world of Kitano, and especially this film, has a certain plot function, even if it's embedded in a very intricately applied plot such as this. In any event, things have consequence, and the grand nature of the way in which violence is portrayed is balanced so well by the camera and what Kitano's eye is able to capture, because as we have seen in the past works and as we see now, he seems to be focusing in on boiling everything down to its essence. And then rather than rely on certain modes of storytelling or genre storytelling, he seems to be instead framing each setup based on the essence of what is the core struggle or the core clash. And then from there, certain variations occur. And so that means we don't get situations necessarily where characters are maneuvering through the space, are seemingly panicked and trying to create a sense of maybe shootouts or gunplay of that kind of nature. But rather we get shootouts that are very, very sudden, and then they involve characters and people in the frame. And then we see one character do one thing with a gun and another character do another thing with a gun and cut back and cut back. And so, in essence, the movement, if you will, is not necessarily generated through the character's movements physically, but rather it seems to be generated through the rapid nature of the editing and the sudden nature of certain uses of sounds and the applications of loud gunfire and explosions and the like. And so this is a very, what might seem to be somewhat antithetical to certain genre conventions of how to portray violence on cinema. But that is one of the fascinating aspects of Kitano's work, especially this film, Sonatine, in that he is showing us a different way, a different application of the expressions of bursts of energy on screen. And they rely, I think, a lot on sound and editing. And therefore, we can see what the characters are doing, and they seem therefore to be representing themselves and also representing a certain aspect of a genre convention. In other words, what we see is representing one side of the fight, and then cut to another shot of another character representing another side of the fight. And so rather than see those characters physically fight it out necessarily, we see the edited shots, and they are juxtaposed together so as to create the representation of a fight that is presented in, as I say, this seemingly antithetical and yet beautifully poetic way that Kitano is very famous for. So that is one aspect of this film that I think is brilliant. It's expressions of bursts of energy. Then, of course, we have the comedic elements, which I think are relied upon throughout. There are, in the violent films, or in the very intense Yakuza films of Kitano, we often see him walking the line very brilliantly between the funny and the humorous on the one side, and then the violent and the horrific and the immoral on the other. And so this is, I think, a trait of the kind of humor and physical comedy and sometimes slapstick comedy that Beat Takeshi is known for as an entertainer, even now in Japan. In other words, we have sketch comedy, and then comedians. There's one comedian that might be an aggressive role, and then the other comedian might be the foil. And so we laugh at the expense of the foil in the story or the context of the particular sketch. I mean, this isn't exclusive to Japanese comedy. This kind of application of the foil in comedic films, I think, is very much existing elsewhere. I think we can see examples of that, say, in American silent comedy, for example. But in any event, this is, I think, a very strong trait of Kitano's comedy. Here, that kind of grammar is applied to this violent world of the Yakuza and the dark underbelly. And so we have setups of situations that, if it were a comedy sketch, it would be quite funny. We see the gangster side and we see the foil, and then we see certain situations play themselves out at the expense of the foil. That would be funny in a comedy sketch scene, and I think even in this context it is very funny. But then we see the genre Yakuza consequences of that, which is again the other side of the line, which is the horrifying and the immoral and quite vicious. And we see those consequences. So therefore we laugh and we feel horrified at the same time. And I think that is a remarkable achievement. And it's one that I think it's something that calls attention to itself, because we understand that Beat Takeshi is also a performer. And so this feels like a performance artist or sketch performance. But at the same time, we realize that the story is still going on when the film is still running, because its running time is still ongoing. And so we are still in this world and captivated by this world. And so there's this interesting, at least in my mind, when I watch this film, there's this interesting way where I see Kitano and I feel like he is playing into his well-known television persona, and at the same time he seems to be battling with it, or perhaps even seeking to destroy it. I'm not sure. In any event, it's a fascinating dialogue that's happening there vis-a-vis Kitano, the entertainer, and also the filmmaker and artist. So it's extraordinary every time I see this and other films by Kitano where that kind of dialogue seems to be occurring. And in that conversation, there are so many things in this film that I would suggest are very much part of the Japanese culture landscape that Kitano really is able to exemplify in a lot of the sequences that he constructs in this film. There are references quite significantly to aspects of culture of Okinawa and dance and music, and there are some characters in particular that carry that through in a very loving and also comedic way. So there are those sorts of connections. There are also the connections about certain details of food and drink and ice cream, and how they play into our general understanding of day-to-day Japanese life, and how those little things also help to forge relationships between and among the characters as well. And so there's a lovely sense of that. Also, there are references to game playing, and some of the games that we see played out or represented in this film have a certain focus or anchor in an understanding of Japanese culture. Sumo wrestling comes to mind as a very vivid example, and the types of games that are played out, I think, are quite remarkable. And what's even more remarkable is, as Kitano is applying these, say, aspects of Japanese culture, he's also turning them on their head, I would argue, in a way that's very creative. It feels very modern, and it feels very much the opposite of antiquated. It feels very fresh and modern, right? So, and the sumo wrestling example is one that I think does that, I think, most strikingly. And I think there's a great subtle statement that's being made by Kitano and company in this kind of employment of cultural signifiers, in that he seems to be saying that there is this modern, refreshing modern edge to everything that might otherwise seem to be considered traditional. And if that's the case, then the sky's the limit in terms of the expression of even the most traditional forms and aspects of Japanese culture. I think we see this a lot here in Sonachine, and I would argue that we will see that a lot in some of the other works by Kitano going forward. In particular, and we will get there when I do the video, if I am able to do the video, but in particular, I think we see that a lot in the film Zatoichi. But saving that conversation for another day, returning to Sonachine, I think ultimately we have a very bold and vicious and extraordinary film. And at its center, we have the performances. And the performance by Beat Takeshi, in particular, I think, is another one of those great, paradoxically brilliant performances. We have to remember, too, that this was still in the early 90s when this film was initially released. I can let you know from my own anecdotally, or from my own experience, that my parents, when they were watching this film for the first time, they were shocked. They were absolutely shocked, because they always knew and always loved Beat Takeshi, the comedian and entertainer on TV that they loved. And then when they saw this film, they were just very shocked, because it does have as I say, the comedic aspects that are very, very much part of the Beat Takeshi entertainment experience. But there are other sides that, as I say, very vicious, very violent, and very unsettling, that make for some pretty interesting responses from people. And so my parents felt that way. But as his reputation as a filmmaker began to grow and grow as the years progressed, my parents later they turned around on this film, and they realized that this is indeed now yet another aspect of the very multifaceted Beat Takeshi persona. And so as one of those facets, a very important one, as a filmmaker artist that depicts violence in this way, they, I think, were very much, later on, very much into this film. And so I would probably say that, therefore, the performance by Beat Takeshi here is a very bold one. Of course, we've seen Beat Takeshi in bold performances before, and we will see him in very bold performances subsequent to this. But this is just to say, again, I can't stress enough just how extraordinary this kind of mix is between the TV persona of Beat Takeshi and then his cinematic persona in this and other films. It's really an extraordinary combination. And so, and the example of his performance here in the film Sonachine, I think, furthers that level of the extraordinary in the way that he's able to portray these kinds of characters. I mean, this character in particular has a very violent edge, a tough guy edge, and he also is very funny. He has a way about him in terms of humor, and he's also very human, because there are moments in the film, of course, where we see his character express very human, frail, and vulnerable things in the Beat Takeshi type of way. And so there is so much richness here, and it's given this wonderful veneer of the Beat Takeshi persona portrayal experience. And so I can't stress enough just how fundamentally important I think that is in terms of the way that this film is as successful as it is as an artistic triumph in the catalog of the filmography of Takeshi Kitano. To end, the film Sonachine is quite violent, and its portrayals therefore probably won't be for everyone, but again, it's portrayed in a very striking way, and it's portrayed in a bold and seemingly genre antithetical way, but still in that imaginative burst of energy that Beat Takashi, or Takashi Kitano, can summon up with his creative powers, and he does so here oh so well and in abundance. This is one of my favorite works by Kitano. I love this film, and I continue to do so. This is the film from 1993. This is Sonachine. Okay, my friends, so that's it for now. And so until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great movies. Thank you so much, as always, for your time. I really appreciate it. Stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.